Good afternoon. We are going to start this today's CME lecture based on diabetic eye diseases. Uh, as you all know, diabetic is a chronic metabolic disorder due to relative insulin insufficiency or increased tissue resistance to insulin, resulting in microangiopathic and macroangiopathic complications. According to WHO 2014, it is estimated worldwide that between 347 to 382 million people have diabetes, and 9% of the worldwide population over the age of 18 years have diabetes, estimated in 2014. And there are about 1.5 million deaths worldwide directly related to the diabetes. And 80% of these deaths occur in the low and middle income countries. So we know the burden of the diabetes both worldwide as well as in Sri Lanka. It is estimated that this disease burden is on the drastic incline, and by 2035 it is estimated that around 592 million people will have diabetes throughout the world. So in coming years, so we expect a great increase in the disease burden. When we talk about diabetic eye diseases, these are a group of conditions that affect people with diabetes, and this whole form of diabetic eye diseases has the potential to cause permanent severe visual impairment, and which includes diabetic retinopathy, diabetic macular edema, cataract, glaucoma, ocular surface diseases, and they are also more prone for infections. I'll be mainly focus on diabetic retinopathy and diabetic macular edema. Others are, of course, separate clinical entities, but diabetes cause them more risk. Diabetic retinopathy, it's a microangiopathic complication in the retinal circulation. The pathophysiology is characterized by microvascular occlusion and increased permeability, resulting in ischemia and leakage in the retinal circulation. This is the most common cause of visual loss among diabetes, and this is the leading cause for blindness among the working age population. On the overall, the commonest causes for blindness is cataract and glaucoma, but in the working age group, diabetic eye disease is the commonest cause. Of course, this runs a long asymptomatic course. They present in advanced stages. When they present with decreased vision, floaters, metamorphosia, which means seeing distorted images. Like if they see somebody, the image is distorted, and then the symptoms of retinal detachment. The risk factors, as you know, the risk factors for the diabetic retinopathy, this is quite very important to remember. The overall glycemic control and duration of diabetes, age of onset of diabetes itself is an independent risk factor, and the other cardiovascular risk factors like hypertension, hyperlipidemia, smoking, renal impairment, and pregnancy. This, of course, quite a congested slide, but you will have to remember this because this is what is important in our day-to-day practice. Right? International Clinical Diabetic Retinopathy Disease Severity Scale. This is what we are practicing, both for the clinical purposes and for the research and academic purposes. We divide diabetic retinopathy into two main groups: non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy and proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Basically NPDR and PDR. Those are the two main groups. In the NPDR group, we divide that again into mild, moderate, and severe. So in your day-to-day practice, just keep this in mind This is what is important, right? NPDR we divide again into mild, moderate and severe. Mild means there are only microhemorrhages, microaneurysms in the retina. Severe means there's a rule called 4-2-1 rule, right? What is this 4-2-1 rule? 4 means there are more than 20 intraretinal hemorrhages in each of the 4 quadrants. That is 4. There should be more than 20 intraretinal hemorrhages in each of the 4 quadrants in the retina. 2 means there are definite venous changes, venous bleeding and dilatation occurs in 2 or more quadrants. That is 2. 1 is a presence of ERMA. ERMA means intraretinal microvascular abnormalities. These are not new vessels, but they are abnormal vessels within the retina. Presence of ERMA within 1 quadrant. So that is the 4-2-1 rule. Anything between severe and mild is moderate. That is how it is classified. So mild means only microaneurysms, and severe is the 4-2-1 rule, and anything between mild and severe is moderate. That is NPDR. And when it comes to the PDR, presence of one of the 2 factors. One thing is neovascularization, which is occurrence of abnormal blood vessels which can be on the disc or within 1 disc diameter area, right? It can be within the optic disc or within 1 disc diameter of the disc. That is called NVD. Or it can occur in elsewhere in the retina. That is NVE. New vessels elsewhere, and there can be new vessels in the anterior chamber angle, so that is NVA, and then there can be new vessels on the iris, so that is NVI. So presence of NVD, NVE, NVA or NVI, that is presence of neovascularization, makes the person to have PDR, and presence of vitreous hemorrhages or pre-retinal hemorrhages, that's the other factor. So we will discuss these signs one by one. Okay, there are no pointers, but if you see right there, you can see a lot of hemorrhages, both microaneurysms. These are pinhead-like dot hemorrhages are microaneurysms, and there can be blot hemorrhages. This is quite a diffuse hemorrhages. These blot hemorrhages. These are intraretinal hemorrhages. These dots we call them dot hemorrhages, but they are not hemorrhages. They are microaneurysms, and there are a lot of hard exudates. This is what we call the fovea. This region is the between the 2 vascular arcades is the posterior pole and the macula, and this is the fovea, and this is the center of the fovea, which is the avascular zone. And so there are hard exudates, is whitish yellow lesions within the retina, and dot hemorrhages and blot hemorrhages. So as you can see, we divide these into 4 quadrants going across vertically and horizontally across the fovea. We divide the retina into 4 quadrants, and if you see in each quadrant, you can see there are more than 20 microaneurysms, 20 hemorrhages. So you don't have to count, but just by looking at this, you know there are more than 20. So this patient falls into category of severe NPDR. Next here there are lot of hard exudates. This is the left eye, this is the macula, this is the foveal region. There are a lot of hard exudates and we can't see the exact fovea. This patient has thickening in the fovea, in the macula. Again, patient with thickening. Yeah. Here you can see the lot of venous changes. As you can see, this vein is dilated and there are bleeding. Can you see this sausage shape like appearance? This is venous bleeding. So if you see a patient with this kind of venous dilatation and bleeding, that is a sign of severe NPDR in at least 2 quadrants. And this is presence of intraretinal microvascular abnormality ERMA, which is seen in the angiographic images. You will not be able to see this in your normal examination. And here, of course, you can see a lot of venous bleeding here. Lot of venous changes and venous bleeding. There are blood hemorrhages. There are exudates. There are hard exudates. There's capillary looping capillaries. So this patient again has severe NPDR. This is what we call presence of neovascularization on the disc. This is the optic disc. This fan-shaped microvascular abnormal vascular network, this is new vessels, which is occurring on the disc. So this patient has PDR. This is NVD. And if you see here, again there are lot of fine network of fan-shaped abnormal vessels there, which is away from the disc. And this is new vessels elsewhere, NVE. Again, here there are a lot of new vessels elsewhere. There are a lot of new vessels and some pre-retinal hemorrhages here. Again, another patient with severe NVD. This is 360 degrees. Patient has a lot of NVD. And this is a picture of pre-retinal hemorrhages. We call it pre-retinal because that occurs on the surface, on the inner surface of the retina, and all the retinal vessels and retinal architecture is obscured because of this hemorrhage. And there are some tractional bands also here. So this patient also falls into the category of PDR. And this is an advanced case of diabetic retinopathy, where patient has lot of vitreous tractions and tractional retinal detachments. So management, we believe, as ophthalmologists, we believe that every doctor with MBBS should be able to see the fundus dilated with the direct ophthalmoscope. So that is a basic requirement for any doctor with MBBS. So that's why during the undergraduate training, we train them to examine the fundus. And anybody who can see the fundus dilated with direct ophthalmoscope can screen for diabetes, retinopathy, right? And in fact, we did a study in 2007-8, like screening for diabetic retinopathy, ophthalmologist versus non-ophthalmologist. there is no significant difference. Of course, there is a difference in classification of the severity levels, but detecting diabetic retinopathy, there is no significant difference. So that's why, based on that, we recommend all the doctors with MBBS, maybe a GP, maybe a specialist of any field, to have a look at the fundus. Management, of course, there's general management and specific ophthalmic management. Generally, as ophthalmologists, what we do for the diabetic retinopathy will not be beneficial to the patient if the patient's general condition is not optimized, not controlled, and that is part of the physicians and the others. So that is modifying the modifiable risk factors. That is the one of the most important thing. And then specific ophthalmic management. In diabetic retinopathy, mild NPDR, moderate NPDR, there is no specific ophthalmic management, but there is general systemic management, modifying the modifiable risk factors and controlling the systemic disease. Yeah. When it comes to the diabetic retinopathy screening, as I said earlier, so any doctor with MBBS should be able to screen for diabetic retinopathy with dilated direct ophthalmoscope examination. The timing is, as you know, type 1 diabetics, they have very short clinical, preclinical phase and they present early. So we recommend them to screen within 5 years of diagnosis, and then annually thereafter appropriately. For anybody with type 2 diabetes, it runs a long preclinical phase. It runs a long preclinical phase. So type 2 diabetes should have their eyes screened on diagnosis and then annually thereafter. We did another study in 2012 in National Eye Hospital to detect the timing of diabetic retinopathy screening. The first ever diabetic retinopathy screening presenting to National Eye Hospital was on average 6 years after the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, which is not the recommendation, which is not up to the standards. 6 years, often they present with complications. That's the average presentation. But the recommendation is to screen on diagnosis. So we are still far behind with regard to the screen. Diabetic in pregnancy, all the pregnant mothers with diabetes should have their eyes screened on the first antenatal clinic visit, that is in the first trimester. And if there is no DR, again at 28 weeks, because pregnancy accelerates the pathology of diabetic retinopathy. If there is diabetic retinopathy, then appropriately according to the severity and according to the patient's overall glycemic control. And most importantly, they should be followed up at least 6 months after the delivery. Treatment options, as I said earlier, whatever we do will not be beneficial if the patient's general medical condition is not controlled, which is proven by these landmark trials in diabetes, DCCT for the type 1 diabetes and UKPDS for the type 2 diabetics. Overall control of HbA1c from 9.1% to 7.3% causes 76% reduction in the primary prevention and 54% in the secondary intervention cohort levels. So that is, we have level 1 evidence for overall glycemic control. In the UKPDS study for the type 2 diabetics, control of HbA1c from 7.9% to 7% was associated with 25% risk reduction in the complications. In the ACCORD eye study, control of HbA1c from 58 to 46, that is millimoles per moles. There is a increase in the ETDRS letter scale. That is something that we have a primary endpoint. And the need for retinopathy requiring laser treatment or vitrectomy has reduced from 10.2% to 6.5%. And progression of retinopathy was reduced by 42%. Again, we have level 1 evidence. And with regard to the blood pressure, the UKPDS study, control of mean systolic blood pressure from 154 to 144 was associated with significant reduction in microvascular complications. So there are enough level 1 evidence for the benefit of the control of systemic risk factors. So optimal control of blood sugars, blood pressure and lipids, regular physical exercise, lifestyle modification, stop smoking, all these play a major part in treating and preventing diabetic retinopathy. And the ocular specific management, we do laser or surgery. We do pan-retinal photocoagulation, which means we basically ablate the peripheral retina, which is the indication is for the proliferative diabetic retinopathy (PDR), or sometimes we do that for severe NPDR also if the patient has like very poor glycemic control, very poor overall control, and patient is less likely to follow up regularly. In that group, we can do PRP for severe NPDR also. And surgical management, vitrectomy, as you see that advanced PDR patient with lot of fractions and sometimes patient with vitreous hemorrhages, we do vitrectomy. And yeah, any questions based on this so far for the diabetic retinopathy? And the next topic is diabetic macular edema, which is again a disease entity as a consequences of diabetic retinopathy and resulting swelling in the macula. Macula is the area which is most sensitive for our vision. So if the macula is swollen, vision will be reduced. After a particular time, there will be irreversible loss of photoreceptors and the ganglion cells. There will be irreversible loss of vision. Here in this picture, you can see there are a lot of hard exudates as seen in this whitish. These are a lot of, yeah, that's fine. There are a lot of hard exudates and loss of foveal architecture and retinal thickening. So there is diabetic macular edema. Again, another picture showing diabetic macular edema, lot of hard exudates and retinal thickening. And this is a picture of what we call OCT, which is optical coherence tomography. The top picture, this is the normal OCT of a macula. There is a foveal pit and all the retinal layers are nicely distinguished. Here is a patient with diabetic macular edema. There are a lot of fluid filled spaces within the retina, which we call IRF, infraretinal fluid, and lot of fluid under the retina, which is SRF or the subretinal fluid, and this affects the fovea. So this patient has diabetic macular edema affecting the fovea or the center. Again, treatment options, as I said, the general overall control, specific ophthalmic treatment. We do laser treatment, focal laser treatment for patients with focal macular edema, that is without involving in the center of fovea. If it is away from the fovea, then we can do FLT. If it involves the center of fovea, of course we can't do laser because laser means ablation or the destruction, we can't destroy the fovea. So in that case, options are to give intravitreal injections in the form of anti-VEGF or steroids. And if there are a lot of tractions, the peritoneal membrane, then the option is go for vitrectomy. So that is basically diabetic macular edema. As general physicians, what you can do is, with any patient coming with diabetes, do regular screening, annual screening, according to that guidelines I have said earlier, with a dilated direct fundoscopic examination. And if you see any changes, you may or may not be able to categorize into the particular level, particular severity scale, but if you see any changes, refer to the nearest eye unit. And the regular or annual screening is most important, because there are a lot of patients with diabetic are followed up by the general physicians, by the other doctors, not only in the specialist clinics. But what we see is they are not being screened on time on a regular basis, and they present in late advanced stages where we can do a little. Sometimes we do lasers, we do vitrectomies, but we can't restore the vision. So we have missed the bus. So before missing the bus, so that is the most important take-home message I have to give you with regard to diabetic retinopathy. Yeah, the next disease is cataract. Cataract is of course a completely different entity, but presence of diabetes increase the risk of having cataract. There is about 60% increased risk of having cataracts, those who are not having diabetics, and also they tend to occur at a very younger age. And there's a separate entity that occurs in a diabetic patient. We call them hyposmotic clouding of the vision. As you know, when there is hyperglycemia, there is aldose reductase mediated pathway which divert glucose into the sorbitol. This sorbitol accumulates within the lens fibers, and which causes, and it does not leave the lens fibers, it accumulates within the fiber and causes hyperosmosis, and according to that osmotic gradient, the water influx into the cell and the cell swells. Ultimately, the entire lens is swollen up, and changing the clarity of the lens, change in the refractive index of the lens, causing myopic shift, and the resulting in clouding of vision. The important thing is, any patient with uncontrolled diabetes, we are not going to do the refraction and give glasses at that event, at that moment. They need to have a good glycemic control, overall glycemic control, and the lens has to come back to the normal state before doing the refraction and prescribing glasses. So you might encounter patients in your clinical practice, that patients coming with fluctuating vision, and if you check the blood sugars, it's fluctuated. Sometimes it goes to 300, 400, sometimes it comes back to hundreds like. So that fluctuation also causes fluctuation of vision. What the patient needs is steady glycemic control. And the other one is glaucoma. We call glaucoma as silent killer of vision, because the patients will not present until the advanced stage of the disease, until they have tunnel vision in glaucoma, which is due to primary glaucoma, unless we screen and diagnose them beforehand, which is a progressive neurodegenerative disease affecting the optic nerve, and they present, as I said earlier, with advanced field loss. Presence of diabetes increases the risk of having glaucoma by twofold. So that is the connection between the diabetic and the glaucoma. And diabetes and ocular infections. Patients with diabetes more prone to get ocular infections like ocular surface infections, endogenous endophthalmitis, which is more prevalent in patients with renal disease with very poor glycemic control. They tend to have sepsis, septicemia, resulting in infection going into the eye, endogenous endophthalmitis, and this is quite very difficult to treat. And sometimes it can be fungal infections as well. And they are more prone for post-operative infections. As you know, the diabetes causes impairment in the subject's immune system. If somebody has uncontrolled diabetes, blood sugar levels like 300, 400, just by giving insulin, if you make it to 100 and doing a cataract surgery will not work. The reason is, like just bringing the blood sugar levels from 400 to 100 by giving insulin will not revert the body's immune system back to normal. It will take some time. They should have a tight overall blood sugar control over a period of time, and that's where their immune system goes back to the normal level, and then only we can safely operate. And that is quite very important, because in our clinics, in our pre-op assessment, we don't operate on patients with uncontrolled blood sugars, and we don't just bring them down with insulin, but we defer them to have a good glycemic control. Any questions so far? That means two things: either they have understood everything or understood nothing. Basically, I want to tell you the two take-home messages. One thing is, any doctor with MBBS should be able to screen for diabetic retinopathy with dilated direct ophthalmoscopy, and if they find any changes, refer to the eye unit. They can do it in their GP practice, in their OPD practice, wherever. If they have any doubt, if they find any changes, refer to the eye unit. That's one thing. Other thing is the overall glycemic control, as well as the blood sugar, blood pressure, lifestyle modification, stop smoking. Those everything plays a major role in preventing diabetic retinopathy and treating diabetic retinopathy as well. Thank you. Yeah, there is an association between diabetic nephropathy and diabetic retinopathy. Both are diabetic microangiopathic complications. Any patient with diabetic nephropathy likely to have diabetic retinopathy as well, but it's not like 100%. It's likely to have, because nephropathy means they are going into microvascular complication, which affects renal microvasculature as well as it affects the retinal microvasculature. So there's no time period as such. By 8 years, by 8 years you can get, there's no time period. There are a lot of genetic factors plays a major role here. We see some patients, as although we said the duration and the age of onset, we see some patients with diabetes for 15-20 years without any retinopathy.
You mean badly controlled or well controlled?
That of course irrespective. I mean, if it is poorly controlled, definitely they will have, but patients with properly controlled diabetes for 10-15 years, they remain without any changes. But there are another group of patients who relatively well controlled still have diabetic retinopathy by about 5-6 years life. So there's a lot of genetic components. There are a lot of studies going on to assess the genetic components, genes associated with this. So there's no studies in Sri Lanka, but there are in other countries, there are studies going on to assess the genetic component, not only these things.
someone has already developed diabetic retinopathy, from ophthalmologist's point of view, do you prefer any kind of anti-diabetic agent over others?
We prefer not to have glitazones if patients have diabetic macular edema. If any patient with diabetic macular edema, it is shown that the glitazones will increase or worsen the diabetic macular edema. But other than that, there is no preference overall blood sugar control. Only thing is, if anybody on glitazones, we recommend not to give glitazones if they have diabetic macular edema.
Overall, fluidization is there?
Fine?
Can get fluidization?
Yeah, that's it. Any other questions? I am not aware of any advantage. So, what do you think? They have not found out any advantage so far, I think. Yeah. Only systemic anti-diabetic medication that we are interested is glitazones. Other than that, particular anti-diabetic, there's no evidence to say that it prevents the occurrence or the worsening of the retinopathy. But what it has shown is any kind of control has definite advantage. Any other questions? Okay, right. I want to thank special thanks to Novartis who sponsored this CME lecture. Thank you for the Novartis and the Chanaka Tissavera, the manager for the Novartis ophthalmology. Right, thank you.
Okay, Max. Thank you so much for the fantastic talk.